Well, welcome. I'm really excited to talk to my friend Amber tonight about her amazing book. And because I'm a Virgo and I crave structure, I'm going to let you know how the night's going to go, which is that we will talk for about 45 minutes, and I think we're going to open up for questions after that. And, you know, Amber and I were talking backstage about how there's been so much kind of dark stuff and deep stuff that everyone's been talking about and dealing with lately, and there's just something in the air that feels very tender and sad these days. So if you will indulge us, we'd like to start with a prayer.
Yes, please.
Dear Lord, thank you, and thank you for your blessings. Thank you, Lord, for delivering 3 very strong white men as possible presidential candidates. Lord, thank you. Protect our sweet Pete Buttigieg and our irascible but always dependable Bernie Sanders. And Michael Bloomberg, give him all the money he needs, Lord.
Praise Jesus. Praise Jesus.
Finally, now more than ever, we must open our hearts to white men and give them the chance that they've never had.
Give them their moment. Give them their moment.
Find mercy, Lord, in all white men's hearts and show them that they too can indulge and revel in your glory.
Praise Jesus.
Praise Jesus, amen.
That's our national prayer buffet.
That's our national, that's our, well, it just had to be said. But we are going to get to present day, because we have been talking backstage about present day and how to stay ignited. But let's talk about era of ignition first. Can I ask you the very basic 101 question, which is how did this become this? Where did the idea first come to write this book?
So this book is sort of a combination, a bit of memoir of my experience growing up in the entertainment business. I'm 36 now, and I've been acting since I was 11. And my own sort of personal trajectory going from, a young woman who really didn't have a lot of agency over her own career, over her own decisions, over her own trajectory. Somebody who sort of felt like she was floating in her own life as opposed to being the arbiter of her own life in a certain way. And then how that changed for me, especially in the last several years, with the inception of Time's Up, post-Me Too movement, but also becoming a director, becoming a producer, sort of stepping into my own space and my own power in a certain way, which really felt like it was mirroring this much larger existential crisis that the country has been having. This really palpable, present rage and anger that feels very condensed and fast-moving and uncontrollable and terrifying, and leaves everyone with a lot of questions and feeling a lot like, are we making the right decisions? Is this a witch hunt? All of that sort of language which comes out of fear. So the book really looks at my own personal life. That's sort of the micro part of it, and the macro is looking at the national existential crisis and what's going on right now in the world. And the title, I hope, sort of reflects that, which is that we are in this very ignited era, and that it feels often like we're being burned, and that it's very scary, and that we don't know which way the wind is going to blow and which way it's going to, if it's going to affect us, if it's not going to affect us. And a lot of the book looks at how to lean into that chaos and not be afraid of it, and that I think it's very important right now that we are having the most difficult discussions of our lifetime. Not only, out in public, but also showing what we're experiencing in private, in the relationships in our life, with the men in our life, with the women in our life, with the politicians who we support, who we love. Just sort of having these conversations in the hope to move the needle forward and to continue creating space for real palpable change, which I think the only way you can do that is to do the things that scare the shit out of you, and to not be afraid, to not lead by being discouraged and being fearful.
You do such a great job in this book of doing just that, of zooming in and out, basically, of taking personal stuff making, the personal political, reminding us of that. And then, making these kind of statements about the world that we live in, and then bringing it back personally to stuff that's going on in real time with your life. Did you struggle with how much to share?
I definitely did. I think some of the hardest parts in the book were less so much, in the very beginning I share a story about terminating a pregnancy because abortion is normal, abortion is normal, abortion is normal, abortion is normal, abortion is normal. And I know I'm speaking to the choir, but also sometimes we're not, and we don't say it enough. So I speak about that, but I think also one of the more difficult parts of the book was talking about my own marriage. And I think a lot of women have been feeling very isolated in the conversation post-Me Too movement, especially if in your heterosexual marriages with white men. It is a very complex conversation that you're having about a women's revolution. And I've said, and I think I write in the book too, that men really only love revolutions when it's their kind of war. But when it's something else, when it belongs to us and it's dirty and it's nasty and there are no rules and there are casualties, they're not cool with that. They're not down with that. So
it's a tough time to be attracted to straight men.
It's a tough time. We're selling those T-shirts in the lobby.
It's tough.
But so I talk a little bit about about that and having that conversation with my own husband and showing sort of, I think, hoping I show the world that they're not alone and that people are not alone in their conversations. And as terrifying as it is, I think it's important to talk about not only what we won't accept publicly and what we cannot tolerate publicly, but also to talk about what we cannot tolerate privately, publicly.
Yes.
And that's the scariest, hardest part.
Well said.
But especially because we're public figures. But this is part of that, I think, leaning into the discomfort of this moment and sharing those type of things, because in an effort for us all to feel safer and to know that everyone is experiencing this. And there's also parts of the book too that I really, call in men and ask them to be a part of this change and give advice. There's like a male ally manifesto that I have in the book that I hope is a really great way for men to feel less frozen in the fear of this moment and more like, this is a really simple way in which you can show up for us in the way that we've always showed up for you.
Yeah, it's such a, since you bring it up, I have it marked down.
Oh.
I think.
We're gonna read the whole book, we're gonna find it.
And it's basically 4 simple ways in which to, when men ask, how can I help? Which they don't often do, but.
Often the question, often what
truly,
I hear.
How can I help is a question that's not asked a lot. And also, can I ask you for some advice?
Yeah.
That's also not asked a lot.
Yeah.
Help is.
That's a great point.
Yeah, I had a therapist who was like, don't only give people advice if they ask for it, and no one ever asks for it. They tell you what's going on, but it isn't followed with, could I hear your advice? It's always, well, and basically in it, one of the things that you're saying, which is so powerful, basically, is focusing on the idea of listening and the kind of getting on your back foot and waiting your turn, or not even maybe waiting your turn, just waiting, just not filling in the silence with your thoughts, advice, or fixes. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I think some of those, and I can't remember what they are either, but
it is in here.
It's in there. But I think one of the biggest challenges is often, and this goes for any of us, right? So I don't think it's just men. I don't think it could be anybody. It's cis people. It's anyone, and that is to say, I have held a position of power. I have been a part of some kind of change before. I have an idea on how to fix it, and I'm gonna put my opinion at the front and the center of how it should be fixed. But also I'm gonna put my opinion at the front of what the consequences should look like. I'm gonna put my opinion at the front of how people should go about changing things. I'm gonna put my opinion at, basically putting yourself at the front of all of those places, and I really make an argument that actually stepping out of the way for people who have been experiencing the othering or the marginalization to be able to cede the floor and hold the floor and be able to be the arbiters of their own change, and then you support that decision, is the strongest thing that people can do for one another. And I think in the same way, you know, in a deeper, in a secondary level, and the book talks about this too, in a chapter that talks a lot about white feminism, and the idea of how white women can really get out of the way when we're talking about race, when we're talking about equality and inclusion and intersectionality. Instead of saying, I'm an intersectional feminist, you know, I care about, you know, black women and race relations in this country, instead of being the one who's centering yourself in that conversation, trying to uplift the voices of women who have actually really been at the negative receiving end of that, which is people of color, women of color. So in that way, it expresses to men in some way, like, this is a great way you can do this. Another great way is to tell women how much money you make if you're in the same business as them, if you're in the same job fields, the same title. It just shows the disparity, the inequality and the pay gap in the workforce. And it can also help women leverage getting more pay, getting better salaries. So anyway, there's several ways in there that I think are really helpful. Ultimately, I'm basically saying, like, put your money where your matriarchs are and start investing more in women. It does nothing but make things better. I mean, look at us.
Well, you know, it's so interesting, though, because I so identify with so much of this, because you and I think, we're similar in a lot of ways. And I think and tell me if I'm speaking out of turn, but I think we've benefited from being able to navigate a very masculine world. So with my generation, what that meant for me is I took on a lot of, and still do, take on a lot of masculine kind of tropes in order to succeed. And I also was and am rewarded for that. So in many ways, what's been so interesting about this movement is kind of circling back to my own femininity, and what that really means in terms of strength and vulnerability, and really figuring out how I want to run my business, or, you know, navigate my relationships, all that kind of stuff. You talk about a Saturn's return in your book, which is so. Anyone here experiencing that right now? Are you experiencing right now?
I'm experiencing. I think, like, know what it is.
Oh, you know what it is. But did you have this is audience participation now. How old are you?
26.
26.
Yeah.
So it's
You're
around
right
your
in it,
end of your 20s, right? Where everything's supposed to get really crazy. And how would you explain Saturn's return?
Simply, it's just a theoretical, metaphysical idea. But okay. Has anyone read The Secret? It's an idea that, you know, simply put, is every 7 years there's a very big cosmic shift that happens in any one individual's life. And that has very much to do with the way in which the stars and the planets predominantly are aligned. Predominantly Saturn and its 7 rings. It's a very complicated idea, but simply put, that there is this rebirth that happens for us in any given person. And, you know, well, I don't necessarily know if that's true. I think there is something to be said for the idea that you and I were born on very individual moments, not just days, not just hours, but moments when the planets were aligned. And I don't know what that means. I would never purport to know what that means. But I think it's interesting to think that you and I are going to walk 2 separate journeys, and that for some reason, those planets align at the exact same point roughly every 7 years. So in a certain way, you are coming back into a rebirth. And it is not nothing that around those times, and especially like at our late 20s, we start to have these real existential crises. So in the book, when I'm talking about the national existential crises, I'm talking about how, if you look actually historically at the every 7-year model, if you look at these variations of time, that you could say that we are in one right now. We are sort of in a Saturn's return of our country, where we are facing these questions of who are we, who do we want to be, who do we not want to be, what do we not want to be, who did we think we loved, but now we don't love them, that they don't care about us. You know, what is the trajectory of our life that we thought we were going to have, but now we're not having that, And we could say the exact same thing about America right now. We could say that about this country. So
Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting, the birthing metaphor too, to extrapolate on that, because like you, I love metaphors, is it is that feeling of having to be very fiercely strong and also an opening and a softening at the same time. It's really wild. Like right now, and it kind of ties back to what we talk about trying to figure out how to not co-opt masculinity to get what you want, is how do you stay strong, secure, and you know, in a powerful position, while still opening and staying soft and expanding and all that stuff, so that you can, you know, give birth to the earth.
yeah, and your life.
And then why are we obsessed with motherhood? You know, because, you know, why are we having so many babies? I mean, it just never stops.
It's true.
I mean, it never stops, because I always think about like the birth metaphor, and motherhood is such an amazing metaphor. And every time I use it, I think about the people who are like, so what about the people that aren't mothers? Well, fuck you then. You know, that's what I feel like they feel, which I totally get.
Boston, ladies and gentlemen.
I mean, okay, I love this line. Will you just talk more about it? So you say, one of the most important gifts we can give one another, regardless of gender, is the gift of not only being believed, but being believed in. It's so nice. Beautiful. Can you expand on what you mean by that?
Yeah, I think, and again, I'll speak for our gender because it's what I know. I would always feel comfortable talking for everybody, but I think for us in particular, but probably for many other types of people as well, you know, the idea of not just having our stories and our narratives believed, but seeing ourselves as not just risks, but as people to be invested in, as ideas to be invested in, with careers to be invested in, with points of view to be invested in. I think that that's one of the biggest struggles that we see, is women are constantly feeling like we are this risk factor, that we are ultimately not choosable, we're not electable, we're not believable. And all of those are deeply tied to ancient sexist propaganda and language. I mean, dating back to the Roman Empire. I would encourage anyone here to read a great book by Mary Beard called Women in Power. It's very short, great book that really looks at women in oratory spaces and public spaces, women who have throughout time, dating back to the Roman Empire, spoken out publicly, and you know, the ways in which they were silenced or pushed out of positions of power, or the way in which they had to adapt to this masculine model. There's actual evidence just showing dating back to that time, of women having to change the tone of their voice to make their resonance deeper, to speak at lower tones. And so I think for a lot of that, the idea of being believed in can go so far for anybody, because it allows you to not only feel seen, but feel like the work that you're doing on this planet to have a voice in a world that is continuously asking us to not have one and to be quiet, even when it's outright saying like, no, we really want women involved. We really want, you know, non-binary people involved. We really want trans people involved. We want everyone involved, but then ultimately not choosing us and not actually making us part of the deeper, harder conversations, not allowing our voices to come through. So it almost feels like this trick mirror at a certain level. So I think being believed in is really important in a world where women are often not the choice. And women, I mean, the Afterward talks a lot about these ideas of women and choice. Women as the choice, women making choices, whether that's about their own body or not.
I think that's why, we know, and one of the many reasons why Trump's win was so rough is it felt very runner-up-y for a lot of women. It felt really familiar.
Oh, yeah.
And it felt like invited to the party, encouraged, promised, excited about, so close, but we're gonna go with this guy. It just felt like that. And it was like, it just triggered so much, and I use the word triggered, but it did, it was a collective, familiar pain.
I write about it in this book specifically and talking about my experience going through 2 campaigns with Hillary Clinton, both in 2008 and 2016, but you know, that exact feeling, what you said, of you know, no matter how anyone feels about Hillary Clinton, there has to be this kind of agreeance that there was pervasive sexism. There remains pervasive sexism when there's any kind of woman politician involved. And the things like the Women's March, and I think a lot of the anger that we were feeling at the top of 2017 and the result of 2017's Me Too movement, I would argue, had actually slightly less to do with Trump winning and more to do with Hillary's loss because of exactly that. Because every woman has been the certainly not perfect, fucked up in their own way, but incredibly qualified for a job, incredibly smart, incredibly connected, you know, certainly the person that should be chosen, who still loses to the village idiot. And that is most women's experiences in any job. So you don't have to be that woman. You don't have to be her in order to have identified with that moment. And so the anger was propelled less by his election and more by the once again, the negative reassurance of our invisibility, as if we don't exist.
And we were talking about this backstage, and we're using Hillary as a model, but this just applies. I mean, we project so much upon her, and we use her in all different ways, and we're as guilty of it as anyone else. But it's also very interesting post-election to watch how people feel about her participating or not participating. It's like a joke that she's walking in the woods, and she's checked out, and then she's asked for her opinion, and everyone's like, whoa. Right? They're like, not so honest, lady.
Yeah.
It's fascinating.
Yeah.
Because it's, again, it feels like a seduction. It's like, no, please come back, we wanna, and she feels like someone that's like, no.
That's the metaphor, right, though, that women are meant to be that blank canvas. We are meant to be something, we're meant to be absolutely everything and absolutely nothing all at once. That is what is expected of us, which is impossible. It's an impossibility.
You speak, for those of you that haven't read the book, Amber talks about some stuff that she goes through during her pregnancy, and one of them is this inflammation that happens in your wrists, and I forget the name of the thing you had. What was it called again?
It was carpal tunnel and de Quervain syndrome.
Okay. How is it right now? Is it gone, or is it?
It's gone. It came back recently. It comes back sometimes when I am writing a lot and when I look like that, like, I think it's like the cat meme or the Kermit the Frog, where he's like, that's when it comes back.
It's so interesting, isn't it? Like, that it's a writing injury. I mean, it's so,
it is a little bit. And I start,
so
like, my
wild.
shoulder, I get off my desk
because it's
and I'm
like,
this.
what's the Chuck, who was the first baseman who couldn't throw to the, do you guys know that?
I don't know.
Knobloch, Chuck Knobloch was, and I don't think that there's a condition that happens sometimes with baseball players where, like, you know, they've been playing baseball their whole lives and they just can't throw the ball back to the pitcher anymore, right? Like, it's this thing, it's a sports thing that happens a lot, especially in baseball. Is there a name for it that I'm forgetting? Yes, thank you. Such a memorable name to describe that. But I found it so fascinating because it is this real autoimmune difficulty that has to do with typing and using your hands to write. Yeah. And it was inflammation, and it was postpartum, you know, and during pregnancy. And I guess what I'm bringing up about it is that I wrote, when I was rereading your book the other night to get ready for today, and I was thinking about the idea of healing and inflammation and how we're all kind of, it's a real, like, big word, right? Especially in LA.
It's true.
I do feel like we're all quite inflamed, right? And it really is. It's the body. The body is just fascinating. It takes on all this stuff, and so this is an example of what was happening to you. How is your body, or how do you take care of your body when the world is on fire?
That's such a good question.
It's such an LA question, too.
Such an LA question.
Just like squats
Well,
or what?
I get cryotherapy on my kneecaps.
You do?
No.
Oh.
I get vitamin B shots in my nose. God,
Yeah.
that sounds painful. I do love a good vitamin B shot. I'm not gonna lie, it's great. I definitely. So when that was happening, I was pregnant with my daughter in 2016. During that year and I was going all over the country for Hillary, and Trump was running, and you were starting to get the sense that this was this really scary virus this person was, and he was bringing something on that was like a plague, an existential plague. And I was having that while I was growing this girl inside of me, and it was terrifying.
Yeah.
And I remember some of those first, op-eds that I wrote, and some of the things that I wrote came directly from the fear of raising a child and bringing a child into this particular world, and how scary that felt. And I was also writing Any Man at that time, which is my novel before this book that was particularly dark and upsetting subject matter as well. So it was definitely, I think, a combination of feeling inflamed and holding a lot of those things in. So so to answer your question, I think some of the things that I've done is I've started meditating. I used to do it more, and then I stopped for a long time, and I try to do it at least every morning. It's really hard. I also do an exercise. If I'm not doing like a full meditation, I do an exercise in the morning where I visualize. This is really intense, so I do not recommend this for everybody, but
This better be some red tent shit coming up. Where you squat and bleed into the ground.
basically,
You know what I'm talking about, Bonnie.
Yeah. I visualize myself dying.
Ooh, tell us more. Ooh, this is awesome.
Well, I go through it because death is scary to me, and I feel it's a lot of healers and friends of mine, psychotherapists and people have talked about doing this as an idea to prepare yourself both for existential death, but for literal death, especially when you're young, if you're thinking about it. And I sort of walk myself through different forms of death, what that would look like.
Whoa.
Having to say goodbye to the people I love.
Woo, girl,
But-
that is first thing in the morning.
Yes. I know.
That is
But you find it actually starts to get a lot easier.
Wow.
And I don't know what that's going to look like for me in the long run. And I don't know if that's certainly great for calming my nerves first thing in the morning.
Or something.
But I think it kind of settles my mind in a certain way and reminds me how fleeting everything can be and how anything can go at any second, and to remind me of the things that are really important while I'm here. So I do that. I also am a big proponent and fan of osteopathy. Thank you. I've been seeing an osteopath for 5 years. She's one of this woman in New York who fixed so much of my back and my shoulder and the issues that I had with all the tingling and the nerve pain and stuff like that. But mostly it's really about settling your central nervous system, I think, which I could write a whole other book about how much I think it is terrible for young kids to be actors, because you are telling the body a lie. You're teaching your central nervous system and your physical body on any given day that it's been raped, it's overdosed from heroin, it's being assaulted, it's being beaten up, it's dead, even though that's not really happening. And I wonder what that does to a child whose body and central nervous system is not fully developed. So I wonder if that's part of, it's worth an exploration, certainly. And I think I look at so many child actors who've grown up, and so few of them have sort of made it out well.
Yeah.
And when you are falsely emoting like that for a living, what does it do to you? So I think a lot of that I have addressed with, good therapy, osteopathy, and booze. And booze.
Sure.
And booze.
And booze. Yeah. Booze cruise.
Booze cruise. Why would you? She cracks her up.
I really crack her up. And then I point to myself. You touched a little bit upon white feminism and you know what it kind of means and how it gets people activated, especially white women. And you have a really interesting conversation in your book with Meredith.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about Meredith for a second?
So Meredith Toulousan is a wonderful, wonderful friend, but also a wonderful writer. She's the former editor of Them magazine, which I believe is like an offshoot of Teen Vogue for the trans community and trans writers, queer writers. And Meredith has an amazing book coming out this fall called Fairest, which looks at her life not only as, you know, a trans woman, but also as a woman of color. She's from the Philippines, and she's also albino. She's got all these fascinating experiences with her life because she has also benefited from a strange form of whiteness. And she's just an incredible woman, and I wanted in this book to do two things when talking about white feminism and owning that pejorative, and really owning it so that we can say, I'm not just out here being my best representative, as Chris Rock would say. Like, I'm not out here just trying to be incredible. I'm also full of shit, and I also have a lot of problems. Right. And I am open to being told about those problems. And my biggest struggle and any of our biggest goals really should be to put down our defenses when someone is coming to you to tell you that. So in the chapter that talks about white feminism, I talked to Ari D. Matthews, who's an incredible poet, Black woman, scholar, amazing woman, professor, and also Meredith. And we have this really cool conversation.
Yeah, I would really encourage you, if you haven't read it, to read it, because it's a great example of what it looks like to have a dialogue and to be a little messy around it, and to learn things in real time and self-correct and just kind of stay open to, and it's the kind of conversation that I think a lot of people are really yearning to have, but are trying to have maybe in the wrong spaces and places.
And I also hope that people who are not like here in LA or who are in states, who might be a fan of mine from the films or anything else, who may not have had an interaction with a trans person, who may not have had an interaction with a queer person, with someone in the community in which they're reading or hearing about, and it feels so isolated. Like there's so much disinformation floating out there about people and about people's lives. But to see two people sit down and have a conversation like that on a book, suddenly when you see things written on the page, there is a permanence to it. And it gives, what I hope is that it gives life to somebody that maybe there are people out here in our country that would not otherwise be able to have that kind of a conversation. They might hear a sound bit on the internet, or they might see, they might hear something, but to see the full transcript like that, I think is really important.
It is. It's like, it really made me feel connected to the experience, and it was like it's the opposite of a tweet. There's this privileged importance that's given to social media now, and it's just, I think, it's like such a tricky thing to navigate well. Yeah. It's like writing a limerick or like a haiku. I mean, you have to get everything out really well, and it has to rhyme, and it is like really tricky. One must be a very good writer to not step in it. Yeah. And then when you do step in it, you don't get to have this kind of conversation. It's just, it felt like really beautifully old-fashioned, like the conversation, what's happened to it. And anyway, how do you navigate? You're a political person, an openly political person, and like you said, you're a human being, so you're learning every day how to self-correct or get better or change your mind or whatever is the thing that you're dealing with that day. How do you stay open to being open? How do you?
Ooh, I have a good answer.
Oh, good.
I think in the idea around, I think a lot about the idea of cancel culture, which I fundamentally do not believe in. I don't think there is such a thing. Name me the person that's been canceled. Is it Louis C.K.? Is he canceled? Pretty sure he's going on like a massive tour. Who would be? Who else? No, he's doing another album. the idea is, what it is we've taken this concept and we've used it as a way to stray from the other conversation that we are supposed to be having about people with bad behavior taking timeouts to be able to think about that behavior and hopefully change the way in which they are behaving in the world, the way in which they are, being present in the world. And I think it's really important to think about not just cancel culture and staying away from that as an idea, but to also not be afraid to, Black feminists have coined this term. It's the best possible term in the entire world, which is to be called in, which is to not just be called out, but be called in and allow yourself to have those difficult conversations, sometimes publicly. I remember, I'll give you like an example.
Yeah.
You know Rachel McKibbins, right?
Yeah.
Rachel McKibbins is this extraordinary poet and friend of mine. And one time her daughter, we were sitting at her house up in Rochester, and her daughter, who's at that time almost 18, something like that, and we were sitting on the couch. I don't remember what we were watching, and she just was like, you know what, sometimes you just gotta get dragged. It's not a big deal. And I was like, it blew my mind. I was like, sometimes you just gotta get dragged. It's no big deal.
Yeah. I think young people understand that a lot more than
And I know that that's not always for the, I know that's not an easy thing, like easier said than done, but this sense of, oh my God, I've been canceled. Oh my God, people are mad at me. The world, everyone is mad at me. And so the reaction to that is to not pause and absorb and listen to what you're hearing, but is instead to defend, to jump back and defend and get really upset and to go into this victimized stage.
Well, it's very primal because you don't want to get kicked out of the tribe.
100%. And so I have found, for instance, and I'll give you a very specific example I talk about in the book, that I, a couple years ago, tweeted something about Maxine Waters, in which I was like pissed off that she didn't endorse Ayanna Pressley and she instead endorsed whoever the guy was that was, the incumbent who was running against her at that time. And of course, Black women on Twitter were like, scourge, like what are you talking about with Maxine Waters? And it became this very, women who I really admired, organizers, activists, they were coming after me. They were definitely having like a very public conversation about me coming out and giving this opinion in a moment in which Maxine Waters was being vilified by the president, and he was calling for, practically violent measures against her. And I remember I was like sick to my stomach over it, like very, very, like I couldn't eat, I couldn't sleep. I was scared to log on. I felt like I had to log on to control it. I didn't know what was being said. It was scary. And I decided in the moment to take a minute and go imagine my death. Right?
So hot.
See what I did? See what I did? Big circle. In the practice of imagining the death, I leapt into it. And I went in and I started to speak to women in conversation on Twitter. I also had some texts from some women that were really upset about it. And I engaged. And I took a moment to learn from the experience of the way in which I had framed this tweet in this moment as someone who was calling herself an ally to Black women, to Black people, to in this particular moment. And I left with several friendships, but one in particular, a woman named Rebecca Carroll, who I write about in the book, who was pretty pissed about it, and she and I had several exchanges. Then we took it offline, and we emailed a few times, and we decided to meet, and we sat down, and we had a glass of wine, and we talked, and I listened, and what was born of that was a very strong friendship that we now have. Very strong. And this was a woman who was like, who the fuck are you? Like, who are you out here, Miss Time's Up, Miss whatever, and this is the way you talk about something? So I use that example to say, I think we need to be more open to exploring those things that scare us and remembering that our ego and our id will often get in the way and tell us that this is the end of us. We're finished, we're done. When the truth of the matter is that it is an extraordinary gift to be given a marginalized person's anger and time to tell you what you've done to upset them. So the moment is to sit in the discomfort of that conversation and have it. That's the responsibility that each of us has. And now, for instance, Rebecca and I, we host things in New York. We did an event for Stacey Abrams. That is a unity that otherwise I could have gone in a corner and gone, they're canceling me. So the book talks a lot about that, and that in particular chapter talks about the idea of feminism and what that really means, what intersectionality really means about putting ourselves on the line at the risk of feeling like there is some sort of existential dread or death that is imminent.
Beautiful. That's amazing. That's amazing. And Maxine would say, not only did you reclaim your time, you reclaimed your wine. So good for you.
Thank you, everyone, for coming, ladies and gentlemen. It's been a pleasure tonight.
But that's amazing. But you bring up something that's very difficult to do, which is sit in discomfort.
And I know that that's not for everybody, but I think each of us can start practicing it a little bit.
And because it's difficult doesn't mean we can't or won't or shouldn't do it. It's just we live in such a comfortable country, and discomfort's very, very uncomfortable.
Yes.
It's really, really hard. And we do everything we can to avoid discomfort.
Yeah.
Even though we're lonelier and more uncomfortable than ever, but we just feel really scared about being uncomfortable and being in discomfort.
Yeah.
Hence, social media and the opioid crisis and television from which I profit. So now as we've caught up to today, so this book was written a year ago?
Yes.
Okay. And you have I think this is the one that has the afterword. Yeah.
Yes.
So what was it like writing the afterword? When did you write it? What is it? And catch us up on that.
So there's an afterword at the end of the book that I wrote at this point probably like 7 months ago, probably like the end of the summer last year. That's not 7 months ago. God, I can't count. But whatever. In the summer, I think last year, and I was actually reading a portion of it at an event in New York, and I was just kind of shocked because I hadn't read it in so long. How still very prevalent and of the moment it was talking about women in politics, talking about this idea of women being believed in and believability and eligibility and all of these things that. At the drop of a dime, we can love a woman emphatically and believe in her emphatically, and then one moment later, one slip of her own truth, and we're calling her a snake, the best of us, which is shocking to me, and also really painful to see a lot of liberal men we love, women we love, engaging in that kind of sexist rhetoric, that Adam and Eve type of bullshit. So it's definitely frustrating, and I think reading it, I was re-reminded of how it's a constant uphill battle, and also talking a lot about women's choices and this, talking about abortion, talking about Roe v. Wade and where we're going, and what a paradox, what a strange thing it is to be an American woman where, only here can your political aspirations rise you up as a potential possible president of the United States while completely rolling back your bodily autonomy and physical rights. Like, I don't know anywhere else in the country that it is that ass backwards the way we have it here. But that's sort of sometimes, what we face in this country.
How do you stay, how do we stay present and not get numb or check out or get fatigued?
That's a really good question. Amy and I were talking a little bit about our mutual numbness backstage, which is,
which is a privilege, by the way. Our numbness is a privilege. I understand,
is.
to be able to be decide when to check in and out of things.
I felt like there was a barrage of op-eds I could have written that were inside of me when that thing happened between Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders about double standards and about truth. And I didn't, and I just felt kind of tired from it. So I feel the fatigue too, I feel it, but I think ultimately we have to remember that this is going to be a really long and painful year. It's going to be difficult for everybody, and we have to find a way to have that perseverance and have that political wherewithal for a long run, and not just have these momentary flare-ups of feeling like we want to be a part of the conversation. We need to have sustained pressure at a certain level. And so we have to think about what each of us needs to do in order to maintain that sustained pressure. There is a reason why, you're not kidding, but it's true that we are a country that is very negligent in that way, whereas other countries have huge uprisings against their government, and not just a one-day women's march. They go out every single day and they fight. And we are not a country that has ever had to do that. That is our privilege. We are the white people of the world, in that way. And so I think looking at it and saying, what are the small things we can stay focused on? And also, what can we do in community with each other? Which is, again, why I think having those difficult conversations, things that make you uncomfortable, is connecting you with parts of communities that we have otherwise sort of pretended to be in community with because of social media, because we're not in person talking to those people, because of this big disinformation machine. It's easier for us to go out and retweet a hashtag than it is to sit down and really be a part of organization, action, things that are taking place in our hometown or even nationally, or to be having a different conversation that's about something you might have done that's offended somebody. So to me, it's about looking at community. Look at who you can be in community with, who you can work with to affect change. And one of the good things I will say about all of this, because I do not believe that we can do any of this work without without a modicum of hope at the edge of it, with this belief that at the end of the day, things are going to be better, that they have to be. That is, to me, like of the utmost importance, is that I maintain some kind of hope with that rage, and that those things can meld together and create in me the kind of propulsion that I need in order to keep doing the work that I want to do without the fatigue, without totally burning out, because I think it's good to be able to take breaks, but it's also important to remember that it is a very long game, and that a lot of us are going to have to be fighting for a very long time, as we have been for generations before.
Yeah, you can punch out, but you have to punch back in.
Yeah, basically.
To finish this segment off, Amber is an incredible poet. She can do so many things well. It's very annoying, and it's true. And I love your poetry. You know I do. You are one of my favorite poets, if not my favorite. You're my favorite living poet.
You're sweet.
And all my other favorites are dead.
Oh, I'm so honored.
I love your poetry so much. I love how you attack it, how you read it, how you approach it. What is the poetry in all of this? Like, do you understand that question?
I don't, but I'm really into it.
Right? If we are working on this poem, or if this year is going to be a poem, I think it's what I love about listening to your poetry is it is it's almost like a song you've always known but never heard. And that's what good poetry does. It's like, oh, there's that song that's my favorite song that I've never heard. And how does poetry inform your activism, I guess? That maybe is the simpler question.
Well, I would say that there's not much about me that's not informed by poetry, not my filmmaking, not my acting, not my writing. Like, all of it is informed at a certain level, but no one's ever asked me that. It's a really good question. I guess I would say that one of the things that I've always gravitated towards with poetry is that in a single line, you can express something that is universally felt and understood in a way that no one has ever heard it before. There's a delayed reaction with a good poem. You'll read it and it'll catch up to you and it'll steal your heart without you even blinking, without you even realizing it's done it. You can do in a single line, a single stanza, what a whole book can do, what a whole chapter can do in other forms. And so I think when I think about activism and I think about certainly like the op-eds that I've written and the ways in which I've hoped to translate my own anger and frustrations and the inability to articulate what is so frustrating about the blindness of our country and our world. To me, having moments that feel unpredictable, like the shift that we had in 2017, having these unpredictable moments where nothing but the truth comes out for any given person, whether you're telling your story, whether you're talking about something that happened to you, whether you're, pushing through and trying to create change at a job, whatever it is, to me is a poetic action, because you are doing something that feels like a slingshot without permission. And so much of poetry is about having no permission. It's about doing exactly what you want and creating line breaks where you want and synonyms the way you want them, metaphors the way you want them. So I guess my hope is that at the end of this long poem, which is hopefully this year, that we have no punctuation, meaning it keeps going, that this is not a point in which we end it and say, this is the great last line, that we keep going and realize that no matter who wins, whether it's Donald Trump or somebody else, that this is a long, long haul and a long fight in retooling a country that has forever, since its inception, not been built for us, not been built to consider us. And that means not just us, women, but minority voices, people of color, disabled people, anybody who has ever felt not heard in a room. This country was not built for us. So to me, the hope is that that poem continues and that we continue writing it.
Beautiful. Thank you. That was awesome. Okay. We're going to hand it over to Ted now. Ted's going to take some audience questions and...
Don't fuck this up, Ted.
So audience questions at Live Talks LA typically begin with a W or an H, sometimes a D. They are generally short. There's no such thing as a two-part question. And tonight, only Amy Poehler gets to ask follow-up questions.
Oh, great.
Thank you. Oh, sorry. You guys mentioned the Male Ally Manifesto.
Did you find it?
Did you find it?
Yes, page 235.
I gotta tell you, I did an event with America Forever in New York, and we did the exact same thing.
And couldn't find it?
Where we just were like making up words while we were trying to find it, and we never found it. So
Thank you.
You found it.
235. I'm
you.
just curious if you've shown it to men and what the reaction to it has been.
I haven't shown it. Dad, where are you? You read it. Dad?
Yeah?
Did you read? You read do you remember reading the Male Ally Manifesto in the book?
No.
So there you go.
You know what? I'm gonna
So there you
introduce you
go.
to this wonderful young lady, and she's gonna read it to you afterwards. We're gonna read it to you together. I haven't, but I have definitely. We did a video for Now This, and they said it was one of their highest watch videos.
Oh, awesome.
In like 6 months. So I assume it resonated, which just tells me I think that we need to be having more conversations about how to bring people into allyship and conversations like that.
Hi.
Hi.
My question is, when you bring up the rings of Saturn, and every 7 years, stuff happens,
Yeah.
how do you make it good instead of bad?
That's a great question. So every 7 years, how do you make it good instead of bad?
Can you influence
Can you influence it? I don't think so. I think part of what it is that idea of leaning into the existential death, right? Of allowing.
You're asking a woman who imagines her own death every morning. Yeah, she's not going to have the good side of this.
No, but I do know what you mean, and I think there's a great Henry Miller quote, which is, "All growth is a leap in the dark." And I love that because I love the idea of thinking about the darkness and not being, I mean, that's like a very, Jungian thing to say, but to think about the mining in the darkness, of going into the places that are most terrifying, because often the change you require and seek comes from that, not from getting away from it, but from going deeply into the things that scare you and that are terrifying and upsetting. And that is where we are able to challenge ourselves, but challenge people around us, and ask questions that might be more difficult. So I'm always a proponent of, in those 7 years, it being not necessarily a great thing, because also, birth is not a great thing. It's painful. It hurts your vagina.
It does hurt your vagina.
But it's not a great, the idea of it is not meant to be good always. So I hope that answers it.
Hi, Amber. I'm over here.
Hi.
I wanted to find out from you just some of the women that you have learned from or used as role models that got you to where you are today.
Some of the women who are role models who got me where I am today. The first person would be my mom, who's right here. My mom is a school teacher for several decades and has specifically taught here in the LA Unified School District area. She teaches something called Counsel, which teaches children to sit in a dialectical circle. Is that? Dialectic practice. I'm doing great. I mean, I'm drinking water. That's the sad part. Grown-ups too, but my mom has worked in everything from private schools here to prisons to places, and the idea is to get people in circle and to, really be able to listen to one another and speak from the heart. And a lot of my ability, I think, to be an organizer, an activist, and to be able to speak in the way I do is because of my mom, because my mom taught me early the value of being quiet and listening. And I think that that's a big, big factor. So I'll say my mom. And I think writers, I would just say women poets like Lucille Clifton, Wanda Coleman, Toni Morrison. Those are some of the women that I think have influenced me a lot. Audre Lorde. Janet Fitch. She's here. Where is she? Oh my God, Janet Fitch is here, you guys.
I didn't know that. I didn't know
No big
that.
deal. No big deal.
I'm
Icon.
nervous.
Icon.
She told me to stand up,
Okay.
so I'm not just. I was thinking about privilege because I had quite the privilege to go to one of the Seven Sisters women's colleges. And so I had those 4 years where everything was possible and it was all women and it was so empowering. And then coming out of that for the past 5 years has been crushing. And I was just wondering, when you've had the privilege to see what it's like, how you kind of carry that forward into the real world instead of just thinking, oh, that was that wonderful time, and how can I bring that to the wider world, that privilege that I had, and share it.
What was the privilege exactly going to?
I went to Bryn Mawr College, which is an all-women's college in Philadelphia.
Right.
So,
Oh my gosh.
yeah, Bryn Mawr.
And then you kind of left that, and then it wasn't the same.
I haven't been surrounded by women in the same way.
Right,
no.
right.
Yeah.
And everything there was for women, and
Right.
I thought I could do anything, and then I found men afterwards.
I didn't go to college, so I'm not sure in that capacity, but I would say that, again, I think it's about figuring out what you have to offer, what your access is with that kind of a privilege, and to think about how to be in community with women, not just who look like you and who come from where you're from, but seriously, how do you go out and forge relationships like I did with Rebecca, within that story that I told? How do you go and seek to find relationships to continue learning from other women, just as they can probably continue learning from you? And there's lots of organizations, there's lots of ways to do it. And if there isn't, you could start a book club probably, and that might start it, and that might start the conversation. But I think be in community, talk to people who don't have the same life experiences as you. That's what I would say for anybody. Unless they're voting for Trump, then fuck them.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi. I have just a question for both of you, maybe, but what are any tips or thoughts you have about how like young girls and women can externalize their anger productively instead of
love that
suppressing it
question.
the way they've probably been told to all their lives?
God, so
Such a good question.
So
Externalize your anger is such a great. Ooh.
This night just got real.
That's such a good question.
It's such a good question.
It's really the last skill that one learns.
I think that's true.
I'm just speaking again as a cis privileged white woman in her mid to late 40s. So I'm very, very inexperienced with how, personally me, it's been my work is how to figure out when I'm angry, what to do when I'm angry, what to do with it, how does it look like. Because I have such little practice. I probably like have done more hang gliding than I have really truly sat in my own anger, and I've never hang glided ever. It's such a good question because we really, I'm the mother of 2 boys, and we really unconsciously, subconsciously, like exalt in their expressions of aggression and anger, and we just don't have. We just don't support it enough. Watching young women enjoy it, and as the mother of a young daughter, how do you encourage Marlo when she's angry?
Well, for her in particular, for kids, I get down on her level, so we're eye to eye, and I always tell her, and sometimes she just will straight up say, she's 3, and she'll say, I want to cry, and I say, you can cry, it's okay, but to validate her emotions, and I think that's a very important thing that I've learned. I would say, for myself as an adult, like I think partaking in January, I had no time or energy, but I did this thing that felt so powerful, which was I joined up with these incredible organizers, Paola Mendoza, Sarah Sophie Flicker, Yara Travioso, these women who are amazing, Nalini Stamp out in New York. Some of those women created the Women's March, and we decided to do the Lasthesis dance out in front of Weinstein's trial, which is, for those of you that don't know it, it was incredibly powerful. These Chilean feminists, I think it was something like 40,000 women, went out into the streets wearing these black masks and or these black blindfolds, singing, chanting this thing, where this song, sort of, with this very minimal dance that goes with it, where it's, the opening lines are like, patriarchy is our judge that imprisons us from birth, and the violence you don't see, and our punishment is the violence you don't see. And there's the lyrics of it are in and of themselves a poem. And the idea is you've got a mass of women simply stating these words in a very militant way. And it was so cathartic to scream at the criminal courthouse, to scream at that process, to point at it, to say, you are the rapist. It's not my fault. It's not where I was or how I dressed. To like scream those words over and over, then to get on the subway and go up to Trump Tower and do it again. And we were doing it so loud in the subway that they actually stopped the Q train and just opened the doors, and they were like, we're just gonna wait till you finish because you're shaking the train because you're jumping so much. And we got off and got on another train. But, to have a moment like that, to physically be able to speak the anger and the truth about something felt very cathartic and very powerful.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Hey there. I'm so happy, Amy, you just mentioned your age. I am going to be 44, and middle age seems to be a bad word.
Oh, yeah, I'm 48, so I don't.
Rock on.
Yeah.
I actually had a girl tell me in a class, I was taking a class the other day, and I am an early empty nester, and she said, wow, it's so great you found something to do with your time. I am going to be 44. Life is
Oh,
not
wait,
over.
I'm 49, by the way. I forgot. What year is it? 2020? No, wait, I'm not 49 yet. Sorry, I apologize. You guys know, once you get past 44, you don't count anymore. Okay.
I haven't read the book, but I was just curious of how you guys deal with. I feel like at 20, I was in my 20s. I was always too young for everything, and now 40s, I'm too old for everything, which seems preposterous to me. So, just curious if that's something you cover in the book, or what your sound offs are on that.
I definitely talk about ageism in the book, for sure. I think that is something that maybe predominantly affects women, but probably also men too, to a certain degree. I don't know, but I would say in the entertainment industry, in our industry, it is a pervasive problem, because you are either the young ingenue, or you're the mom character or something, and there's really, up until recently, hasn't been a lot in between.
I have a good solution for this. I just added another category. I just like to add new categories to things. And you know how they say, what is it? It's like maiden, mother, crone. Isn't that the 3 stages of?
Yes.
Isn't it maiden, mother, crone? I've added boss between mother and crone. So before you go to crone, you're in boss for a while.
I really like that.
And I like that too. So it sounds like you're in boss time. And sometimes people try to, throw rocks at the boss. But whatever, you're a boss, you don't care.
Into it.
So, Amber.
What's up, Dad? So we meet again.
Yes. And I'm 85, so the rest of you are punks. Remember that.
Fair.
Okay, number 1. I would like you to just talk a little bit about, I know that there have been some men. You remember what men are. There are some men that have...
It's so hard for you to not be included in this, Russ. I understand.
No. I don't want to, not me. But there are some men that maybe you could talk about that have influenced and channeled your poetry from the very early on. Maybe you could talk about them.
Yeah, I get it.
Not me, but I'm talking about poets.
Yes, but isn't this interesting, what's happening here?
I know it is. Someone asks about the women that influenced me, and
yes, and I get it, and it's this is the discomfort that's tough to sit in.
Yeah, it is.
Right?
Yeah.
Because Russ, I'm going to use you as an example because you can take it because you're a tough guy. But so that's I really relate to this, because what starts to happen is when we start to talk about what one section or group of things someone else wants to say, but also don't forget me. I mean, it's very personal. It's very it's
that's the all lives matter.
Yes.
Because then we start to say, oh, if you're talking about one group, don't forget this other group.
And what Russ is also saying is, I'm not with them.
Yeah.
Which also I get too, right? Like, I have so many men and women who, men and women want to say hey, I'm not, I mean, it happens all the time, right? Like, I might, look, I'm from Boston, right? So, I mean, and, a lot of time I'm trying to be like, hey, I'm not from Boston. Whatever, we all have this thing where we're like, I'm from Boston, all the good parts, but not any of the bad parts. I'm the good version of that. And it's, because is that what is behind your question, Russ? Which is, no. I'm really trying to help you out here.
When Amber started writing poetry when she was 10 years old, that was incredibly beautiful. There was a couple of poets. They weren't women. Mm-hmm. They were men. It was Jack Hirschman that really influenced her poetry.
Yeah.
And when she would write a poem, he would write corrections, if you remember correctly. So I just want to get one little man in there.
Yeah, I have a lot to say about that.
I love this. This is your book.
Could you talk about that?
This is
Amber?
your book.
Yeah, it is.
Because this is so fantastic. And
it's happening. It's all happening.
It's happening in real time.
It's happening.
You're picturing your own death right now.
I'm actually picturing someone else's death.
But is so funny. It is because Russ. Let me just ask you this as Amber's therapist. Your instinct or desire, one's instinct or desire to make room for Jack in this conversation is very interesting because I bet Jack got plenty of room and space as a poet. Am I wrong?
I will tell you what's fascinating about this is that I was just in San Francisco and I spent every day with Jack, who is a fantastic poet and is my writing mentor for sure. Jack was so moved by a conversation I had with Saru Drelleman, who's this amazing organizer, works for ROC, which is the Restaurant Organizers Center, I think. She works with like 13 million people in the restaurant industry. Major activist and organizer. Jack was so moved by the conversation that we had and a term that I coined, which is when women are angry and organized, we're angrenized. So I coined this term of being angrenized, which is not, I coined it for women, but it is for anybody who feels that way. That he actually went home and called me later that night and said he was working on an arcane called the Angrenized Arcane. And he wrote it, and he emailed it to me 2 days later, this long poem, and he asked me for notes. And I went through, and I sliced and diced, and gave him some changes and things like that, and what came out from it was a really beautiful piece, and was also just a very fascinating experience to have that with your mentor. But it was beautiful, and it was his moment of learning and saying, I need you. I need your guidance in this to know how to write this properly. And it was really beautiful.
Well, you're coming along.
Thanks. Ted, no more.
Ted, he's cut off. Ted, he's
done.
cut off.
He's canceled. My dad is canceled.
I'm gonna try and follow that one up. You guys were talking about being just exhausted in general, and writing can be very therapeutic, but it also can take a lot of energy out of you. And I was just curious how you find the energy to be creative in this time.
Well, I felt like a few years ago, I would say that I had, becoming a mother had sort of weaponized me in a certain way and made me feel very forceful and powerful, and that like writing these books, writing these works, directing a film even were in some way a form of survival, whether that's existential survival, career survival, the need to have this fundamental radical change. So how I find it, like right now I would say I've in the last several months have had definitely a real feeling of stasis and not really wanting to do anything creative. My other writing mentor, who I mentioned earlier, who's not Jack Hirschman, who's no longer with us, is Wanda Coleman. And she always had this really beautiful, she came to it from a very wonderful perspective, which I'll share with you, which is that there's no such thing as writer's block, that is when the muse is sleeping. And we have to let our creative selves rest. We can't just go for the sake of, as some people would say, you have to write every day to be a good writer. You have to produce every day to be a good producer. You have to do every day to be a good doer. And Wanda was very much about absorbing, being the quiet person, you know, absorbing and learning from what's happening around you and letting the muse sleep. And I love that as an idea. So I hope you take that with you creatively if you're feeling any sort of stasis in your own experience. Let her sleep. You know, she'll wake up when she's ready.
We have time for 2 more questions.
Sorry, I'm gonna hope that this comes out well. I wasn't sure what to expect coming here tonight, but it's very clear after listening to the both of you that you both fight for so many different things. And you've mentioned multiple times tonight that you will be fighting for a very long time. So my question is, in order to keep focus on the future, do you have a mission statement that you can give us tonight that we can all take with us?
Oh.
Of how to keep fighting, you mean?
What you're fighting for.
Oh, wow. That's a great question. I mean, it really is a great question, because I'll quickly say I wouldn't be ready to say what it is, but what I love about that question is it makes me think about what it should be in that way that Amber's talking about poetry, right? What is that line, the essence of like what is the thing? Carving away at what it isn't to get to what it is. That's a really interesting exercise to do. I mean, we spend a lot of time writing our, New Year's resolutions and like, what's like, our how we explain ourselves in social media, like, what's our statement, what's our thing, but how interesting.
What's our brand?
What's our brand? I mean, we're really into branding. Amber and I both
Really into it.
But what an interesting challenge and question to say, like, what would be your mission statement for this day, for this experience, for this year, for this week? It's such a great one.
Yeah. I actually don't know if I have an answer. The afterword in this book ends talking about real freedom and what freedom looks like for a country that is founded on that principle, but which has given very little of it to anyone in many different ways. And so what that looks like to not only want freedom for yourself and to search for that for yourself, but to think of what that looks like for other people and to think about how to help other people attain that. So I think about freedom a lot, freedom to choose, the freedom to elect, the freedom to be chosen. So many factors of that apply. So I think that that's a big word, and I think especially in a country right now and with a presidency like this that is trying to tell us what freedom is when it actually isn't that. I think about the reclamation of that word.
And I would add too, just because I think that the pressure sometimes to get things right, because when you ask me that question, I go into really wanting to get it right. So maybe I would say that, just thinking on my feet, that my mission statement would be to keep moving even if I don't get it right. Because I think that there's something the stasis often comes from fear of getting it wrong.
I love that.
And so maybe it's less about the statement and more about continuing to kind of write the statement, scratch it out, write it again, say it to somebody, they're like, go back, write it again, you fucked up, you said it to the wrong person, you said it wrong, do it again, Maybe it would be that.
Yeah, that's the idea too of, when people tell you to stay in your own lane, that saying. And I always say, I hear that, but, keep driving the car. Stay in your lane, but keep driving the car. And I think there's a propensity for people to have that feeling of like, don't keep moving forward. And I so agree that the mistake is not the problem. The not trying and not pushing through is often a problem. So.
And our final question of the evening.
Hi. I wanted to touch on, just expand on that fear. I think there's just throughout the night you guys were saying that we have to sort of lean into fear. You said it now and you said it earlier about leaning into that. And I have fear right now. I'm standing up asking you this question, so I'm leaning into that. But my question sort of had to do with that, but it's more direct, like, what is our call to action? Like, I think we all, want to be better and work for our country and help create conversations. What can we do? What is our call to action for tonight?
Well, I think our call to action is to stay engaged in every possible way, and I think just you have to stay engaged. We have to think about what each of us can offer, the access that each of us has, and everyone here has something. You may not think you do. You do. You have some access, you have some knowledge of something, even if that's an organizational skill, even if that's something you do in your job. So I think in the sharing of information and the sharing of skill and the sharing of organizational and activism practice, to remember what each of us has to give. And you might not think that there is something you have to give, but you do. And to always keep considering, I've used this as a metaphor before, but to not just think so much about like linking arms with the sisters around you and the people around you, but to not forget the people who are behind you, the lines of people who are behind you, just as you would hope to have those in front of you pulling you forward. So keep thinking about that.
Very good. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy.
Thank you, Amber.
Thank you for praying with me.
Thank you. God was here tonight.
God was with us. God graced us.